Hey gang, Kevin here, Life22. And today we're going over Vivek Ramaswamy's book, Woke Inc. And we're going to try to do this on the Sony VZ1, but apparently we're having technical difficulties. She's overheating again. I wonder if I have to start dropping some of the settings on it. I don't use it that often for things like that. They're usually shorter videos, but as you can tell with these book reviews and stuff, they have a tendency to get a little long. So, to stick with the timing on this, my goal is to have I'm going to complete the podcast, so here we go. Vivek Ramaswamy. So he wrote the book Woke Inc. Now, he was recently a candidate for the Republican 2024 presidential race in the Republican primary, and he had stepped down in the last few months, I believe back in 2023. So, but before his announcement to run, he released Woke Inc. in 2017. And I listened to it on podcast, on Audible. It's a very good book. I like it. It talks about, and I'll go through the chapter heads with you again, but he talks about how he, his background, things like that, introduction to the woke industrial complex, as he calls it, the Goldman rule, he breaks down, and things like that. And he talks about how capitalism, and I'm a big fan of capitalism, how capitalism, has a tendency to creep, and it's a good thing, and it's one of those things like nobody wants to hear it, right? Like if you love capitalism, you either love or hate capitalism, and if you love capitalism, which most people should, there's my bias right there, right? So most people should. He tells about how like capitalism doesn't fit in every box, and I always thought that it should. And he brings up a good point. He's like, no, but he's like, there are points in your life that you do not want to bring up. Capitalism doesn't need to be in. Capitalism does not need to be in religion, because it'll have a tendency to corrupt religion, and religion will have a tendency to, corrode capitalism, and the two shouldn't be together, right? In those two instances, right? There's a time and a place, right? So it's the same way that the founding fathers said that there was a separation of church and state, which didn't mean anything to do with the fact that you shouldn't have religion in school. It was that you shouldn't have government touching your religion, because government has a tendency to corrupt as well, and government will corrupt your religion, and now all of a sudden you have a corrupted religion. So those are some of the things that he brings up in his book. Very, very interesting stuff. And then he goes into how corporations were started and how investing and things like that. So, right, like you're Joe the plumber, and you have a plumbing company, and then you and your wife start another business, and then you're making good money off of both these businesses that you run and operate, or you have a 9-to-5 job and you have extra money, and you say, I'm going to buy company C. I work for company A, my wife manages company B, or runs company B for our family, and then company C we're going to take our extra income and invest into, rather than the stock market or futures or a new car. We're going to put our money into company C. And then we're going to hire Joe Bill the manager, right? Okay. Jeff the manager, whatever, because you're Joe the plumber, right? So Jeff the manager runs company C. Well, he has a fiduciary obligation to you to manage that company, and he's a fiduciary, which means he's held to the highest standard of law. And in most of these agreements, like, they're financially, criminally, and civilly liable for anything that they do, because you're entrusting in them this responsibility, obviously in turn for compensation. So you turn around and this company, Jeff manages the company into the ground. Well, he owes you for his mismanagement, and because you entrusted in him. If he takes, if he does a lot of dumb stuff and the company gets sued, well, he can personally be sued. It's like he has no protection, which, as he shouldn't. If he's going to take on that role for an exorbitant wage or whatever it happens to be, whatever they negotiate, he's supposed to be protected. And our government used to enforce that stuff. And then what happened was, you have people that and then it applies the same for um, for the management structure of publicly traded companies. I'm entrusting in you, not something that I solely own, but something that we all can own by investing our money into the stocks. So you have an obligation, a fiduciary obligation is to the stockholders. And so so it used to be the same way. You could be criminally charged for misconduct, unethical behavior, what have you, theft, if you're mismanaging other people's money in a publicly traded company. But now our companies are all like, a lot of the workforces are woke, right? So they're kids that are churned out by our education system to have all these radical ideologies, and then they start protesting, and you got like 1% of the companies protesting, and so the entire management structure kowtows to them, and it's ridiculous because, well, if you're kowtowing to them and following their agenda, which may not have anything to do with the company's mission statement and has nothing to do with the stockholders other than the fact that you would have to mismanage their money in order to kowtow, like, it's, oh, we have to represent the stakeholders of the community. It's like, no, you don't. You have to represent the stockholders of the community or of the company. And that is your job. And if you don't do your job, you should be arrested. You used to be arrested for stuff like that. You used to be personally, financially responsible for that. Oh, I just mismanaged $1 million. But guess what? You owe the company $1 million. That's it. Like that, you don't get to pick and choose. And now our government is allowing these companies like Disney to be enforcing, like, to be pushing a narrative that is like, don't say gay in Florida, which didn't exist. Nobody said you couldn't say gay in Florida. They just didn't want you teaching sexual orientation to children who could not understand sexual orientation. And it was just one of those things. He talks about this in his book. He's like, man, this is, he's like, he doesn't talk about the don't say gay bill, but that was just the most recent example I can bring up. That they bring this up and they say, you shouldn't be saying these things to children. Well, he doesn't say in his book, but like, you shouldn't be pushing these agendas when it is not your duty. Your job specs talk about what you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to return on investment to stockholders. That's it. If you want to go out and be a philanthropist, you take the nice salary you get as part of the management team, and you do that. You start your own non-for-profit with your own funds, and you do your own generation of funds. There's no reason that you should be taking over somebody else's or a group, a publicly traded company, and acting like a parasite and just operating it like Plankton and SpongeBob. He brings all that up, and it's very interesting, and it's in his experience as a CEO and of a company, and his experience in the field, as well as during his time at college, and being a kid whose parents emigrated to America, and things like that. It was a very all around well written book, and it does bring up a lot of stuff with having a lot of insight in it. Obviously he's got his opening credits. I'm going to go through the list here of the different chapters, and then I'm going to give you my recommendation, which obviously you can probably tell is probably pretty good. So he goes into the introduction into the woke industrial complex, the Goldman rule, how I became a capitalist, the purpose of a corporation, the rise of the managerial class, the ESG bubble, an arranged marriage, henchmen of the woke industrial complex, when dictators become stakeholders, the Silicon Leviathan, wokeness is like a religion. Actually, wokeness is literally a religion. Critical diversity theory. Woke consumerism and the big sort. The bastardization of service, and who are we? Question mark. And there's acknowledgments and then end credits. So really just, he kind of just breaks this idea down of like what is currently going on from his experience and perspective. And he's right there in the trenches, so I wouldn't I wouldn't be questioning him, you know, I wouldn't be questioning his experiences because he's right there. I'm less there than he is, and I can, but what he conveys in this book is very, very interesting, and I highly recommend it. It's a good listen. You might not agree with everything that he says, but I have a feeling you'll agree with a lot of what he says, and he'll give you some good insight. And so for that, I recommend this book. But on to the next one, guys. Thanks. We'll see you next time on Life 22.